The life and work of Vachel Lindsay is, first and foremost, a story of hope.
He was a true eccentric.
He had an amazing foresight. He felt he was a self-appointed prophet.
Vachel Lindsay was, at one time, a household name.
I think his greatest legacy is encouraging us to look at art in a new way.
He was in complete rapture about words and the power of words.
He also strives for no less than to be the salvation through art for all of us. It's a bold endeavor.
Vachel was born and grew up in this house, and he was a very precocious child. Both of his parents encouraged him not just to seek an education, but to educate himself in private as well. This house, every wall was lined with books. There were books stacked up on every table, and Vachel read every single one of them. This house doesn't just tell the life of Vachel Lindsay, but it tells the life of a very extraordinary family.
This is not a rich family. This is not the great mansion on the hill, but this is a substantial, comfortable, upper middle class, cultured family.
When Vachel was growing up in this house, this was full of people coming in and out. Not only was Doctor practicing from this house, but Kate, Vachel's mother, was also the founder of several civic organizations, so there were always people in and out of this house.
One of Dr. Lindsay's specialties was obstetrics, and of course we all know that babies arrive all times of the day and night, so Dr. Lindsay had to be ready at any time if he was needed. Dr. Lindsay was a little concerned that if his bedroom was on the upper level of the house, where it traditionally would have been, that he wouldn't hear someone who needed help. So the Lindsays made one of the parlors on the first floor into their master bedroom. We also have the parlor and the library itself on the other side of the entry hall, where the Lindsays would entertain their guests.
The oil paintings on the walls are all Kate's. She painted a number of them right inside the dining room, actually.
When Vachel was about 13, his parents would have taken him to the Columbian Exposition in Chicago. According to his sister Olive, they did spend a lot of time looking at the art exhibits that were there, and that probably inspired his work as an artist. He was also greatly influenced by some of the civilizations of the past. He was particularly interested in ancient Egypt. He was interested in China. He was interested really in studying different groups of people from all over the world, learning about different cultures.
The Wedding of the Rose and the Lotus was inspired by the building of the Panama Canal. So the rose represents the west and the lotus represents the east. Vachel believed that combining the East and the West would make people appreciate each other's cultures more, and the world would become more at peace in this one huge united entity.
Flags of the Pacific and the Atlantic meet. Captain calls to captain. Fleet makes cheer with fleet. Above the drowned ages, a wind of wooing blows. The red rose woos the lotus woos the rose.
After dropping out of medical school, he went to art school in Chicago and New York, both of which were a bust. So they wired him some money and told him to get a train right back to Springfield. Instead of getting that train, he walked down the coast into Florida and then back up through the south into Springfield. And that would be the first of his 3 tramps across the country.
As he would go on these walking journeys, no money in his pocket, handing out copies of his work and offering to trade rhymes for bread, perform for people in exchange for room and board, or even do farm work or other things that they might need. But he meets a lot of common everyday people, and he gets to know them and learn about who they are and their experiences in the world.
He was meeting people who would otherwise be overlooked in the country, the people who couldn't read quite often. That's why Vachel's poems are quite rhythmic. They were written to be performed. He was often flailing his arms. He could foam at the mouth, roll his eyes back in his head. It was a real experience. This was a time before television, certainly, but a time before radio even. There was a huge hole that Vachel managed to fill for a lot of people.
Vachel kind of had his own philosophy on what he thought community should be, what he thought life should be. One of the things he passed out on his walking journey across the country was something called the Gospel of Beauty. And in this Gospel of Beauty, Vachel describes how he thinks people should live. One of the things that he says is that children should be able to find their own passion, and they should be encouraged then to pursue that wherever it takes them. And that people should travel the world in search of all of the greatest sources of beauty and enlightenment and learn as much as they can. And then they should return to their hometown and use everything that they've learned to make their hometown the best place that it can be.
I would be one with the dark, dark earth, follow the plow with the yokel tread. I would be part of the Indian corn, walking the rows with the plumes o'erhead. Stars, like daisies, shall rise from the earth. Acorns fall round my breast that bled, fruit of the traveler heart of me. Fruit of my harvest songs, long sped, sweet with the life of my sunburned days, when the sheaves were ripe and the apples red.
He would often engage the kids on the farm as he's going down the middle of the road, or people he met in small towns or cities, have them perform his poems with him. He would teach them parts of the poems that they would recite along with him and engage and embody when he would perform his poems.
Just then a bee flew close to their rail. Those two black crows turned pale, and away those crows did sail. Why? Beep, 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 beep. Beep, 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 beep. Well done. Give yourself a hand. Good job, bees and crows.
Vachel broke through to a national audience with the publication of General William Booth Enters into Heaven.
General William Booth was the man who founded the Salvation Army.
At the time of his death, he was an internationally beloved figure. Hundreds of thousands of people turned out for his funeral.
Lindsay really wanted to celebrate who Booth was, and so the poem does that, and it does it in a classic Lindsay fashion, becoming bombastic at times and passionate and never ashamed about the passion and rapture that Lindsay felt and that Booth felt for Salvation Army.
And the first stanza is,
Booth led boldly with his big bass drum.
and the audience responds with,
Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb?
which is the Salvation Army hymn.
Hallelujah! It was queer to see bull-necked convicts with the land made free, loons with trumpets blare, 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 on, upward through the golden air.
For most people, that was not only the first time they were experiencing poetry, but it was Vachel singing it to them so they don't have to know how to read it out of a book. And on top of that, they are now a part of the poem themselves because they have parts they have to recite back to Vachel.
Imagine going to a performance of your favorite musician, and you go and you sit there in the stadium and you listen and you hear the words and everybody stands up and sings along with the best parts.
Every slum had sent its half a score. The round world over, Booth had groaned for more. Every banner that the wide world flies bloomed with glory and transcendent dyes. Big voiced lasses made the banjos bang. Trans-fanatical they shrieked and sang, Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb?
Vachel became a huge sensation across the country. Once he becomes successful, he becomes one of the most popular performance artists in America.
He then began to write poetry with a message. He confronted issues like race relations, workers' rights. He explored all of these topics through his poetry. It has to be said, his poems worked. They changed the way people thought about these topics. Vachel wrote the very first ever book of film criticism, The Art of the Moving Picture, and that was inspired by Vachel's deep understanding of the ancient Egyptian language.
He looked at hieroglyphics as kind of a return to, we were once a people who thought in images, became people who think in words, and now with film, we're returning to that element of thinking in images again. You read a movie, you don't just take it in thoughtlessly. He saw a renaissance happening, and he had this opportunity to really grasp that new art form, elevate it, and help it be something for the masses. He breaks what he calls photoplay down into 3 parts. There's the photoplay of action, which he equates to sculpture as an art form. There's the photoplay of intimacy, which he equates to painting as an art form. And then the photoplay of splendor, which he equates to architecture. So that's the grand sweeping photoplay. He felt like a movie should be a community event. The theater would become this new social center. It would be a center of knowledge, center of information. So he envisioned film schools, great film archives where we study films of the past. He envisioned films as a common element in public schools. He predicted documentary filmmaking. He said we need to make films about, very specifically, he talked about women's suffrage, films on safety, films on abstinence. I think on an even grander scale, though, he prophesized what the internet has brought to us by suggesting we put government documents on film. We present those in a theater, running constantly. He foresaw this open and 24/7 access to news before we had that. He had this vision of the possibility, the potential for more than just film for entertainment. This was to benefit all of us, to make us all smarter, more enlightened. And when that comes, then the more our spirit is improved, the better we are in our community. But his ambition and his hope was clearly eclipsed by this growing industry, this powerful industry. And people voted with their box office dollars. And they're not the films Lindsay had hoped that we would get. So he saw that kind of spiraling out of his hands. Kaufman calls the book cranky and dated, right? It is kind of cranky. I just think it's noteworthy. I think it's remarkable, the creativity that went into this book and this thinking, as nitpicky as it might be.
Vachel had more hope than anybody I've ever read about. He donated to poorhouses, to hostels. He lived what he preached. He believed in what he was doing, and he created a world around himself in which he could thrive until that world started to flicker, and then his troubles began. Vachel was diagnosed as epileptic, and depressive episodes often accompany that. It's all speculation now beyond that diagnosis, but I think he may also have been bipolar. Because his poems were performative, he had to tour. So he would tour most of the year. As he got older, it just exhausted him. His debt grew, his crowds got smaller. Vachel had to take a break halfway through his final tour. Every show that he missed meant more debt that was going to stick. So to try to cheer himself up, he performed at the First Christian Church on 6th Street. And for the first time in Springfield's history, they gave Vachel a standing ovation. He turned to the preacher and said, "I feel as though I finally won the heart of Springfield." And Vachel came home and kind of just languished for a few days. And then eventually he took his own life, I think attempting to end his life in a very Shakespearean way. He thought he was drinking poison and that he would die peacefully in his bed. In reality, he drank very caustic chemicals, and it took 2 days for him to die.
Here, at midnight, in this little town, a mourning figure walks, who will not rest, near the old courthouse, pacing up and down, or by his homestead, or in shadowed yards. He lingers where his children used to play.
He often wrote about Springfield. In fact, the dream of all Springfield writers, the first lines are, "I'll haunt this town, though gone the maids and men, the merry few, my friends and loves today. When far off children of their children play, my ghost returns bearing a great sword pen." So Vachel loved the city so much he promised to return to it and haunt it.
I think his greatest legacy is encouraging us to look at art in a new way, to think about what it is beyond just what you're seeing or just what you're reading, and what are other ways that we can share it with people? How does it become part of our daily lives? How do we express ourselves and express our reactions to things happening around us in a creative way?
Find something that you love and invest in it. If you love sculpture, if you love poetry or fiction writing, or if you love photography, something that you love that speaks to you about the world you're in, and care about it, and do things about it. Engage yourself fully with every fiber of your being, and get people together to celebrate that. And be engaged with rapture and celebrate the beauty of nature and what is around you. Those are the key lessons from this.